The sun was blazing over the Oakwood Country Club, bouncing off crystal glasses and my husband, Gabriel's perfect smile. On the surface, everything looked flawless. Successful husband, beautiful brunch, my best friend Grace laughing beside me with a mimosa in hand. Then my 5-year-old daughter Maria reached into Grace's purse, looking for gum, and pulled out a heavy black metal credit card. She held it up and asked loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Mommy, why does Auntie Grace have Daddy's special work money?" And just like that, my perfect life cracked open. The sun that morning was almost painfully bright, the kind that glints off polished silverware and crystal glasses until everything looks a little too perfect. Oakwood Country Club was buzzing with quiet laughter and the soft clink of brunch plates, white linen tablecloths, fresh flowers, people dressed like they had nowhere in the world to rush to. And at our table, we looked like the picture of success. My husband Gabriel sat across from me wearing that confident smile he used whenever investors were around. Tailored shirt, relaxed posture. The man looked like someone whose life was completely under control. To my left sat my best friend Grace, elegant as always, slowly sipping a mimosa from a tall champagne flute. Her designer purse rested casually beside her chair. If anyone had walked past our table in that moment, they would have thought we had it all figured out. And then Maria got bored. 5-year-olds don't care about adult conversations about investments and market timing. She slid off her chair and wandered over to Grace. "Auntie Grace, do you have gum?" Grace laughed lightly, waving a hand toward her purse without even looking. "Sweetie, check inside." It was such a normal moment, so ordinary. Maria unzipped the purse and dug around with the determined focus only a child can have. Lipstick, keys, sunglasses. Then she pulled something out. Not gum, a black metal rectangle. The corporate onyx card. Gabriel's card. Maria held it up in her small, sticky hand, squinting at it with curiosity. Then she turned toward me and asked in that clear 5-year-old voice that cuts through any room, "Mommy, why does Auntie Grace have Daddy's special work money?" The sound that followed wasn't loud. It was the absence of sound. Grace's mimosa glass slipped from her fingers and tipped onto the table orange liquid, spreading across the white linen. She stared at the card like it had just grown teeth. Gabriel's face drained of color so quickly he looked almost gray. 3 seconds. That's how long it took for the life I thought I understood to start unraveling. But I didn't scream. Screaming is for people who are shocked. And somewhere, deep in the quiet part of my mind, the part buried under years of hospital shifts and mortgage payments, I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't shocked. I was confirmed. Slowly, I reached out and took the heavy card from Maria's hand. It was sticky from spilled mimosa. I wiped it clean with a linen napkin the way I'd wipe down medical tools at the end of a shift. Precise, careful. Gabriel's mouth opened, then closed again. Grace fumbled with a napkin, muttering something about a misunderstanding that floated uselessly in the air. I stood. "We'll discuss this at home," I said. My voice sounded calm, almost detached, like someone reading a verdict. I took Maria's hand and walked away from the table, leaving the broken silence behind us. I didn't look back at my husband. I didn't look back at my best friend. Because at that point, I wasn't interested in their excuses. I was interested in the numbers, and I intended to find them. I didn't drive home. Home was where the photographs were, wedding pictures on the wall, Smiling vacations that suddenly felt like props in someone else's play. I didn't want emotions yet. I wanted answers. So instead, I drove downtown. Gabriel's office building sat in the middle of the financial district, like a monument made of glass and steel. On a weekday, it buzzed with assistants, analysts, people hustling between meetings. But on Sunday, it was silent, empty. The kind of quiet that echoes when you walk through it. I parked in Gabriel's usual spot and carried Maria inside, still sleepy from the car ride. The lobby lights were dimmed, the security desk unmanned, but that didn't stop me. Years ago, during the early days of his company, back when things were tight and payroll sometimes came down to the last minute, Gabriel had given me access to everything. Security codes, passwords, emergency logins. Just in case, he'd said. I guess he assumed I'd forgotten them. I hadn't. The keypad by the elevator blinked softly. My fingers moved almost automatically. Code. Beep. The elevator doors slid open. Upstairs, the office floor was dark except for the faint glow of emergency lighting. The place smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. Gabriel's office door stood exactly the way he always left it, half open like he was inviting people to admire the mahogany desk inside. I set Maria gently on the leather couch in the corner. She curled up immediately, hugging the small stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere. Then I sat down at his desk. The chair was still warm from sunlight pouring through the tall windows. Outside, the city looked peaceful, almost innocent. Inside, I logged into the corporate finance portal. The screen flickered to life, and there it was. Not chaos, not some dramatic flashing warning. Just numbers, rows and rows of numbers. Now here's the thing about working as a triage nurse. When someone rolls through those emergency room doors bleeding, you don't panic. Panic wastes time. You assess the damage. You trace the source. You stop the bleeding. So that's exactly what I did. I started clicking. One tab, then another, then another. At first, it looked like normal business expenses. Travel reimbursements, vendor payments, marketing costs. But then the pattern started to show. A charge jumped out at me. $6,000 Serenity Spa, $6,000 in one afternoon. I clicked deeper. Another transaction. $12,000 Graceful Designs, LLC. Grace's Boutique. I opened the payment history. More transfers, more deposits. Then I found the one that made my stomach go cold. Consulting fee $3,000. Bi-weekly transfer. Recipient Grace Reynolds. Every 2 weeks. Like clockwork. I leaned back slowly in the chair. $3,000. That number wasn't random. It was familiar. Because that was exactly what my take-home pay looked like after a 2-week stretch at the hospital. The same paychecks I earned working night shifts, weekends, holidays. The same hours I spent on my feet while Gabriel talked about building the future. I kept scrolling. The little bar on the right side of the screen was tiny. So tiny it meant there were pages and pages of transactions I hadn't even seen yet. Spa trips, transfers, boutique inventory, consulting payments, lifestyle spending. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't even a few reckless charges. It was a system, a lifestyle. And suddenly, the story Gabriel had told for years about the struggling startup, the investors taking time, the temporary setbacks started to fall apart. He wasn't building an empire. He was bleeding the company dry. And I had been the one keeping it alive. My double shifts paid the mortgage. My salary covered the groceries. My overtime kept the lights on while he played CEO with money that wasn't even his. The numbers on that screen weren't just financial records. They were hours of my life. Maria's dance classes I said we couldn't afford. The vacations we postponed. The small sacrifices that had seemed responsible at the time. I reached for the printer. The machine hummed to life, filling the silent office with a steady mechanical rhythm. Page after page slid into the tray. Evidence, transactions, proof. By the time the stack finished printing, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. Those are reactions for someone who still thinks they're confused. I wasn't confused anymore, because as I gathered the papers into a neat pile, one realization settled into my chest like ice. I hadn't just been a wife, I had been the primary investor. In a fraudulent operation. By the time I got home, the sun had already dipped low enough to turn the kitchen windows gold. I sat at the island with a folder of printed records in my bag, the granite counter cold against my forearms. The house was quiet in that heavy way that comes before a storm. Then the front door slammed. Not closed, slammed. Gabriel walked into the kitchen like a man marching onto a battlefield. His tie was loosened, his face flushed, and I could smell the sharp edge of scotch on his breath before he even spoke. "You humiliated us," he said. "No hello, no question about where I'd been. Just accusation. You made a scene in front of the most important investors in the city. Do you have any idea what you've done to my reputation?" I didn't answer. I just watched him. It was strange, really, almost clinical, because I could see something clearly now that I hadn't seen before. He wasn't afraid that I had discovered anything. He was angry that I had stopped playing my part. The back door creaked open then, and Grace slipped inside like she belonged there. She wasn't holding a mimosa anymore. Instead, she had a tissue pressed delicately against her eyes, though the eyes themselves were completely dry. "Jasmine," she said softly, voice trembling in that practiced way she used when she needed sympathy. "I can't believe you would think something like that about me. We're family." Family. That word hung in the air while Gabriel pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. Grace took the seat beside him, the two of them forming a united front across the counter. And then the story began. It was impressive, honestly. A masterpiece of improvisation. They talked about a surprise investment, a secret plan they had been building for months, something they wanted to reveal when the timing was perfect. The spa charges networking events with potential partners. The payments to Grace's boutique temporary capital for a joint venture they were launching together. The consulting transfers completely normal for a new fashion tech collaboration. Gabriel leaned forward as he explained it, his voice gaining confidence with every sentence. "We were building something big, Jasmine. An empire for this family." Grace nodded eagerly. "We wanted it to be a surprise. Something amazing for you and Maria." And suddenly the story flipped. Now I wasn't the betrayed wife. I was the paranoid one. "You ruined the moment," Gabriel said, shaking his head. "All because you didn't trust us." I sat there listening to them weave their fiction, and something strange happened. For the first time in years, I could see the entire pattern. It reminded me of something I once read about in a psychology article. The boiling frog. If you throw a frog into boiling water, it jumps out immediately. But if you place it in cool water and slowly raise the temperature degree by degree, the frog never realizes it's being cooked. That's how it had happened. Years ago, Gabriel started missing dinner once a week. Then there were separate bank accounts for tax purposes. Then Grace started making little jokes about how my nursing job was so cute compared to their high-stakes business world. Small things, tiny temperature changes, until suddenly I was standing in a kitchen listening to my husband and my best friend explain why thousands of dollars of his company's money were sitting in her purse, and I had been the frog calling it a warm bath. Gabriel slammed his palm on the counter. "You're being crazy," he said. "Give me the card back, Jasmine. We have meetings tomorrow." I studied his face for a moment. The twitch in his hand, the tightness around his mouth. Cornered animals always look like that. Slowly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the black metal card. The corporate onyx card. It felt heavy in my hand. They didn't know that earlier that afternoon, the moment I left his office, I had already reported it lost, canceled, frozen. I slid the card across the granite. The scraping sound echoed softly through the kitchen. "Here," I said. Gabriel grabbed it instantly, relief washing over his face like someone who had just dodged a bullet. Grace exhaled. They thought they'd won. They thought the old Jasmine, the one who worked double shifts to help build Gabriel's dream, had folded again. I stood up. "I'm going to bed," I said quietly. "I have an early shift." Then I walked upstairs, leaving them behind in the kitchen. Behind me, I could already hear the soft clink of wine glasses. Their celebration, their victory. Let them laugh. Let them believe the water was still warm. Because what they didn't realize was this: I had already turned off the stove. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. The house was silent, heavy with the smell of stale wine and something worse lies that had been sitting in the air overnight. For years, my mornings started the same way: coffee, brewing lunches, packed Maria's shoes, hunted down under couches. Not that morning. I didn't make coffee. I didn't pack anything. I pulled on my scrubs, tied my hair back into a tight bun, and looked at myself in the mirror. The uniform felt different that day. Less like work clothes, more like armor. Then I walked out the door and drove, not to the hospital, to the bank. The waiting area was quiet, almost too comfortable. Plush chairs, soft lighting, a digital ticker scrolling numbers across a screen like they meant something to the people watching them. I sat there with the folder of printed transactions on my lap and waited. Finally, a door opened. "Jasmine?" David stood there holding it open for me. I recognized him immediately. A few months earlier, his son had spent 3 nights in my pediatric ward recovering from appendicitis. I'd checked his vitals at 2 in the morning and reassured a terrified father that everything was going to be okay. Now the roles were reversed. David's expression was serious as he waved me into his office. "I pulled the records you asked about," he said, closing the door behind us. It took some digging. He laid a stack of spreadsheets across the desk between us. Rows of numbers, transaction histories, corporate filings, a roadmap, and every road led somewhere ugly. The joint venture Gabriel mentioned, David said tapping the first page is registered through a shell company. He turned the document so I could read it. Registered location Cayman Islands. No physical office, no staff, just paperwork, a financial ghost. My stomach tightened, but I stayed quiet while he continued flipping through the pages. Grace's boutique, he said next. Graceful designs. Technically, it's been bankrupt for about 18 months. I blinked. Bankrupt. Technically operating, he clarified, but only because of external cash flow. External cash flow. I didn't need him to translate that. Gabriel. David slid another page forward. Most of the money sustaining it is coming from Gabriel's company accounts. Transfers. Deposits. More transfers. Then he pointed to another column. And the investor capital he claimed he was managing. I nodded slowly. It's not investor capital, David said. It's a series of high-interest personal loans he took out against company assets. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just stared at the numbers while the picture slowly assembled itself in my mind. Gabriel wasn't managing money. He was borrowing it. over and over again, borrowing from lenders, borrowing from the company, borrowing from anyone willing to believe the story. And then David pointed to another section. This part, he said carefully, is where it becomes personal. He circled a line item with his pen. Consulting fee $3,000, bi-weekly transfer. Recipient Grace Reynolds. Again, and again, and again. Every 2 weeks. Consistent. Precise. My throat tightened. $3,000. That number wasn't abstract to me. I knew exactly what it was. That was my take-home pay from the hospital after taxes. 2 weeks of 12-hour shifts. 2 weeks of aching feet. 2 weeks of missing bedtime stories because I was finishing chart notes under fluorescent lights. I could see it clearly now. While I was working overtime to cover groceries and mortgage payments, Gabriel had been taking the exact same amount of money and wiring it straight to Grace. Like clockwork. Like my labor had been automatically redirected into her life. David was still talking, but his voice had started to blur around the edges. He's covering her rent, her car lease credit cards, basically her entire operating budget. Operating budget. That's what they called it in spreadsheets. I remembered Grace complaining once about how tacky it was to stress about money. She'd said it while wearing a dress that probably cost more than one of my night shifts. Now I knew why. I swallowed hard and forced my voice to stay steady. Is the company solvent? David hesitated. Then he shook his head. Barely. He's robbing Peter to pay Paul. I let out a slow breath. And Paul, David added quietly, is his cousin. For the first time that morning, I leaned back in my chair because the realization finally settled into place. Gabriel and Grace weren't rich. They were performing rich, playing high society with borrowed money and fake confidence while the entire structure sat on top of debt and deception. And the only reason the lights hadn't gone out yet was me, my salary, my overtime, my careful budgeting. I had been the stable piece in a house of cards, the responsible one, the one paying the electric bill while the two of them played dress up in a life they couldn't afford. David looked at me carefully. These are serious financial irregularities, Jasmine. If this ever becomes public, it will, I said quietly. He stopped talking. I gathered the papers slowly, stacking them into a neat pile. But not yet, I continued, because something inside me had shifted. This wasn't about confronting Gabriel in a kitchen anymore. This was about understanding the entire system he had built. And systems like that, they don't collapse from shouting. They collapse from evidence. I was already standing when David reached for another sheet in the stack. Jasmine, there's one more thing. The way he said it made something in my chest tighten. Not panic exactly. More like the quiet sense you get in the ER when a patient looks stable, but the monitor suddenly makes a sound you've never heard before. He slid the paper across the desk. I wasn't sure if you wanted to see this yet, he said carefully, but you should have the full picture. The document stopped in front of me. Transfer confirmation. Recent. Very recent. 3 days ago. I scanned the lines automatically the way I'd been scanning numbers all morning. Amount $60,000. My brain paused there for a second. 60,000. Then my eyes moved to the next line. Source account Maria Reynolds. College Trust Fund. For a moment, the words didn't make sense. They sat there on the page like letters from another language. Maria's trust fund. The account we had started when she was born. Birthday checks from my parents. Small bonuses from the hospital. Money quietly set aside over years so she would never have to start her adult life buried in student debt the way Gabriel and I had. I kept reading. Recipient Graceful Designs, LLC. Grace's boutique. The air in the room seemed to thin. My fingers tightened on the paper as my eyes dropped to the last line. Authorization Jasmine Reynolds. My name. My signature sat neatly at the bottom of the form. The loops of the J. The sharp cross on the T. At first glance, it looked perfect. Too perfect. I leaned closer, and that's when the details started to scream. The pressure of the ink was wrong. My real signatures always pressed harder on the first letter. Years of signing hospital paperwork had made it a habit. This one was smooth, careful, like someone who had studied it. The slant of the letters was also slightly off. Not something most people would notice, but when you've signed your name thousands of times, your hand remembers the rhythm. This wasn't my rhythm. This was an imitation. A clumsy one. The room felt like it tilted slightly to one side. Is this... I started, but the words stuck in my throat. David nodded slowly. It appears to be a forged authorization. Forged. The word landed like a weight. I looked back down at the number again. $60,000. That wasn't just money. That was every birthday envelope my parents had mailed for Maria since she was born. That was the holiday bonuses I quietly transferred instead of buying something for myself. That was years of saying, maybe next year when Maria wanted dance classes or summer camps that didn't quite fit into the budget. Every sacrifice, every careful decision, gone, vaporized in a single transaction. They stole from her, I whispered. The sound of my own voice surprised me. It came out rough, like something tearing. They stole from a child, because that's what this was. Not a bad investment. Not a misunderstanding. Not even just a betrayal between husband and wife. This was theft. From a 5-year-old girl who still believed her father hung the moon. A sharp pressure twisted in my chest, and for a second, I had to grip the edge of the desk, just to stay steady. Images started flashing through my mind. Maria asleep with her stuffed rabbit. Maria proudly showing me the drawing she made at preschool. Maria asking if we could visit the ocean again someday. Gabriel tucked her into bed every night, read her stories, kissed her forehead. And 3 days ago, that same man had signed paperwork, stealing $60,000 from her future. Not because she needed help, not because the family was starving, but because he needed to keep pretending he was rich. Because Grace's failing boutique needed another lifeline. I felt something inside me snap into place then. A shift so sharp it was almost physical. The woman who had been sitting here all morning confused, her trying to understand the scope of the betrayal, was gone. In her place was something else. A mother. A very calm, very focused mother who had just discovered the wolf sitting in her daughter's nursery. I folded the document slowly and held it up. "It's a felony, isn't it?" I asked. David didn't hesitate this time. "Yes," he said quietly. "Wire fraud, forgery, theft." I nodded once. My hands had stopped shaking, because suddenly the situation was very simple. Gabriel hadn't just betrayed me. He had crossed a line you never cross. He had stolen from my child, and people who steal from children don't get second chances. I didn't go home after leaving the bank. Home suddenly felt like the wrong battlefield. Instead, I drove across town to a quiet neighborhood, lined with trimmed hedges and wide porches. The kind of place where everything looks orderly from the outside, where nothing ugly is supposed to exist. Gabriel's mother lived there, Patricia Reynolds. If Gabriel was the polished public face of ambition, Patricia was the architect behind it. The family matriarch, the one who always hosted perfect holiday dinners and spoke about legacy like it was something you could polish and display in a cabinet. If anyone knew how deep the rot went, it would be her. I parked in front of her colonial-style house and sat in the car for a moment with the folder in my lap. The papers felt heavier now, like they had weight beyond ink and numbers. Then I got out and walked up the stone path. My heels clicked against the walkway, sharp, steady sounds that reminded me of a clock ticking down. Patricia opened the door before I even knocked. She must have seen my car pull in. "Jasmine," she said with a polite smile that faltered almost immediately when she saw my face. Is everything all right? I didn't answer. I just walked past her into the living room. The space smelled faintly of lavender and furniture polish. Everything looked exactly the way it always did. Neatly arranged, comfortable, peaceful. Like a museum exhibit of a happy family. Jasmine Patricia said again, closing the door behind me. Where's Gabriel? She asked. Busy, I said. Busy pretending to run a company. Her brow creased. What do you mean? I opened the folder and pulled out the transfer confirmation. The one with the number that still made my stomach twist. $60,000. I handed it to her. That I said is Gabriel stealing Maria's college fund to pay for Grace's boutique. Patricia frowned and adjusted her glasses, squinting at the document. What is this? That I repeated calmly as a felony. Her eyes moved slowly down the page. The transfer. The recipient. The signature. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached the bottom. He forged my name, I continued. He took $60,000 from a 5-year-old's future. Patricia lowered herself onto the sofa like her knees had suddenly stopped cooperating. For a long moment, she just stared at the paper. Then she sighed. Not shocked, not outraged, just tired. He told me he was borrowing it, she said quietly. My blood ran cold. He knew I asked. Her eyes flicked up quickly. I didn't know about the signature, she said. I swear. He said it was temporary. Just a bridge loan until things stabilized. My hands tightened at my sides. Grace is always in trouble, I said, my voice rising despite myself. Always. Why is he so obsessed with saving her? Why does he rob his own child for her? Patricia didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked over toward the fireplace. There was a framed photograph on the mantel I had seen dozens of times before. A picture from 25 years ago. Teenage Gabriel standing beside a girl with long, dark hair. Grace. They looked young, close. Closer than cousins usually look. Patricia followed my gaze. They aren't cousins, she said quietly. For a moment I thought I had misheard her. What? My sister adopted Grace when she was 12. Patricia explained slowly. She couldn't have children. The room seemed to grow very still. Gabriel was 15 when Grace came to live with them. She swallowed. They bonded very quickly. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Too quickly, Patricia added. My voice came out barely above a whisper. What are you saying? Patricia closed her eyes briefly. When they were in their early 20s, before you met Gabriel, they were together. The words landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Not as family, she said softly, as lovers. The room tilted. Suddenly, years of memories started rearranging themselves in my head. The private jokes between them, the late-night business meetings, the strange looks they shared when they thought no one noticed. I had dismissed all of it because they were cousins, except they weren't. I thought it ended. Patricia said, her voice cracking slightly. When Gabriel met you, he promised me it was over. He said Grace was just family. I let out a hollow laugh. They never stopped, did they? Patricia didn't answer. She didn't have to. Every transaction I had seen that morning suddenly made perfect sense. The spa days, the boutique payments, the consulting transfers. I hadn't been funding a business partnership. I had been funding their relationship, their life together, every overtime shift I worked, every bill I paid, every sacrifice I made. All of it had been quietly redirected into their little fantasy, their secret world. I had been the third person in my own marriage. And worse, I had been the bank. Does anyone else know? I asked finally. Patricia shook her head. No, just us. I took the paper back from her hand. Not anymore, I said. She stood quickly. Jasmine, please, she said, panic creeping into her voice. Think about the scandal. Think about Maria. I am thinking about Maria. My voice felt hard now. Solid. That's exactly why I'm done protecting them. I turned toward the door. Jasmine, but I didn't stop walking, because at that point the truth was undeniable. The rot didn't stop with Gabriel. It ran all the way through the story they had built. And when something is rotten all the way to the core, you don't repair it, you expose it. I sat in the car for a long moment after leaving Patricia's house. The engine was off, the afternoon sun glaring through the windshield, and the folder of documents rested on the passenger seat like something alive. Inside it were spreadsheets, transfers, loan records, and the forged withdrawal from my daughter's trust fund. Proof, not suspicion, not guesses. Proof. For years, I had tried to solve problems with conversations, with patience, with giving people the benefit of the doubt. But evidence doesn't argue. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. The screen lit up with Gabriel's name. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I picked it up. Gabriel, investors are here. Where are you? We need to present a united front. I read the message twice. A united front. That phrase almost made me laugh, because it told me everything I needed to know about how he still saw the situation. In his mind, nothing had really changed. The brunch disaster was just a minor crack in the performance. Something we could smooth over if I showed up smiling and played my role, the supportive wife. The calm, respectable nurse standing beside her ambitious husband, while he told another polished story to people with money. He thought I would nod politely, smile at the right moments, help him keep the illusion alive. I looked down at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My scrubs were wrinkled. My hair was pulled back in a tight bun that had started to loosen during the day. There were faint shadows under my eyes from too many sleepless nights. I didn't look like the polished wife investors expected to see. I looked tired, but I also looked different, sharper somehow, like someone who had finally stopped pretending. Slowly, I reached over and pulled the folder into my lap. The papers inside rustled softly when I opened it again. The shell company, the consulting transfers, Grace's bankrupt boutique, Maria's stolen college fund. All of it was right there. I typed a reply. I'm coming. That was all he needed to hear. I set the phone down and started the engine. The car hummed quietly to life, vibrating beneath my hands as I gripped the steering wheel. The office building was about 20 minutes away. 20 minutes for Gabriel to finish charming his investors. 20 minutes for Grace to sit in the corner, pretending everything was normal. 20 minutes before the entire story they had been telling the world collapsed. Traffic lights blurred past as I drove downtown. With every mile, the weight in my chest shifted. The fear faded. The doubt disappeared. And in its place grew a strange, steady calm. Gabriel wanted a united front. He wanted a performance. That was fine, because I was about to give him one. Just not the kind he expected. The conference room was exactly the kind of place designed to intimidate people. Glass walls, chrome fixtures, a long polished table that reflected the overhead lights like a mirror. The kind of room where decisions about millions of dollars were made, while assistants quietly poured sparkling water. When I stepped inside, the conversation stopped. Gabriel was seated at the head of the table, exactly where he liked to be. 3 men in expensive suits sat around him, his angel investors, the people he had spent years impressing with presentations and promises. Grace was in the corner, perched on a chair like a nervous spectator. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. Gabriel stood up immediately, his smile stretching across his face like it had been practiced in a mirror. "Jasmine," he said quickly, walking toward me. "Honey, you're here." His eyes flicked down to my scrubs. You came straight from work." There was a tightness in his voice now. "We're in the middle of a strategy session," he added, carefully, glancing back at the investors. "But it's good you came. We were just about to discuss." "I know," I said. My voice sounded calm. "I'm here to update the strategy." I walked to the center of the table and placed the folder down in front of them. The soft thud of paper hitting polished wood echoed in the quiet room. Gabriel's smile faltered. "What is this?" he asked. I didn't sit. Instead, I looked at the men around the table. "Gentlemen," I said, "my name is Jasmine. I'm Gabriel's wife." One of them nodded politely. I recognized him, Robert. He had attended a few holiday parties over the years and always asked about my work at the hospital. "I think you should see these," I continued. Gabriel moved quickly, then reaching for the folder. But Robert was faster. His hand landed on it first. He opened it. The room went silent except for the soft sound of pages turning. Spreadsheets. Transaction histories. Transfer confirmations. Robert's brow furrowed as he scanned the documents. Another investor leaned closer to see. Grace shifted nervously in her chair. "What exactly are we looking at here?" Robert asked slowly. "That I said is a record of where your investment money actually went." Gabriel let out a sharp laugh. "Jasmine, it didn't go to research and development," I continued. His voice rose behind me. "She's upset. We had a family disagreement earlier and it didn't go to marketing." Robert flipped another page. The transfer to Grace's boutique. Another page. The bankruptcy filings. Another page. The bi-weekly consulting payments. "I went to rent for a failing dress shop," I said calmly. "Spa days. Personal expenses." Grace made a small, choking sound. Gabriel's face turned red. "She's lying," he snapped. "She doesn't understand corporate accounting." "The bank records do," I said. Robert reached the final page. The forged trust fund withdrawal. His eyes froze there. The room grew very still. "Gabriel," one of the other investors said. Slowly, "This says $60,000 was taken from a child's trust fund." Gabriel slammed his palm on the table. "That's not what it looks like." Grace suddenly burst into tears. "We were going to pay it back," she cried. "It was just a loan." And Robert looked up at Gabriel. "You told us the company had an 18-month runway." "He has a runway of 0, I said quietly. The room erupted. Voices overlapped instantly. "What the hell is this? You said the capital was secure. You took personal loans against company assets." Gabriel shouted back, trying to regain control. "You're overreacting. These are temporary liquidity issues." Grace was sobbing openly now, her mascara beginning to streak. I stood there for a moment, watching it all unfold. The chaos, the shouting, the illusion collapsing in real time. None of it belonged to me anymore. Gabriel suddenly turned toward me, desperation breaking through the anger. "Jasmine, please," he said. "Tell them it's a mistake. We can fix this." For a second, I studied his face. The man I had married, the father who used to read bedtime stories. But that person felt very far away now. "I am fixing it," I said. Then I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Robert's voice, low and serious. "Call the DA." The door closed softly as I stepped out into the hallway. And for the first time in years, the lies were no longer my problem. I didn't go home after leaving the boardroom. The city felt too loud, too sharp, like every street corner still carried echoes of the shouting and the stunned faces around that long, polished table. Instead, I drove across town with no real destination in mind, just letting the quiet of the car settle around me. By the time I pulled up to Maria's school, the sky was already fading into evening. She came running out with her backpack bouncing behind her, scanning the parking lot until she spotted my car. The moment she climbed in, she gave me the same small smile she always did, the one that made everything else seem a little less heavy. Hi, Mommy. Hi, sweetheart. I didn't tell her about the boardroom. I didn't tell her about the shouting or the way Gabriel's voice had cracked when the investors started reading the documents. She didn't need that. Are we going home? She asked, buckling her seatbelt. Not yet, I said gently. I thought we could take a little drive. She nodded, perfectly content with that answer. We drove toward the coast, the city slowly giving way to quieter roads. By the time we reached the pier, the sun had slipped low enough to turn the water into a sheet of copper and gold. The small cafe at the end of the dock was still open. I ordered 2 hot chocolates. Maria sat across from me at the wooden table near the railing, her legs swinging lightly beneath the chair as she wrapped both hands around the warm cup. For a while, we didn't say anything. We just watched the waves move slowly beneath the pier. Finally, she looked up at me. Mommy. Yes. Why didn't Daddy pick me up today? The question hung gently in the air between us. I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. Daddy made some bad choices, I said softly. And those choices caused problems for a lot of people. She frowned a little, thinking about that in the serious way children do. Is he in trouble? Yes, I said. Another pause. Are we in trouble? I reached across the table and brushed a strand of hair from her face. No, I said. We're going to be okay. She seemed satisfied with that. Kids often are when the person they trust most sounds certain. She returned to her hot chocolate, leaving a small chocolate mustache above her lip. Behind us somewhere, far away, there would be phone calls, lawyers, investigations, questions. But out here, the ocean moved in slow, steady breaths. When we finished our drinks, I walked back to the car and pulled out my phone. 2 names sat at the top of my recent calls. Gabriel, Grace. For a moment, I stared at them. Then I opened the settings and blocked both numbers. Just like that, the screen went quiet. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked over at Maria as she climbed into the passenger seat again, still humming softly to herself. The road ahead was uncertain. There would be challenges, changes. But as I started the car and the ocean faded into the rearview mirror, one thing felt clearer than it had in years. Whatever came next, we were finally free. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with a dramatic confession. Sometimes it reveals itself in quiet details, numbers that don't add up, a signature that shouldn't exist, a moment when you realize you've been carrying someone else's lies for too long. And sometimes the courage to walk away comes from the simple promise to protect your child. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to follow along for more.